Hey, what's up everyone? Jason Turley here, back with another video. Today I'll be going over the top 5 skills that I believe cybersecurity beginners should learn. Quick disclaimer here, these skills are not all inclusive. They're simply the things that I believe all beginners should know as they're navigating the vast field of cybersecurity and they're lost and not really sure where to go. These are just the bare bones basics. It's not all inclusive whatsoever. And if you stick around to the end, I do have a special bonus skill, a bonus tip that I don't see recommended that often that I think will help you guys out. So in no particular order whatsoever, just the order they came into my brain. Tip number 1 is you need basic computer knowledge. So whatever device you're watching this on, whether that's your phone or tablet or a laptop, that is a computing device, right? It has different internal as well as external hardware. On the internal side, you have things like the computer processing unit, the CPU, the random access memory, so the RAM, right? So the more RAM you have, essentially, the more programs you can run at one time on your computer. And then there's different storage devices, so like your hard drive or your solid state drive, or externally, you can plug in a flash drive. Some other external hardware devices and components are your keyboard and your mouse. Pretty self-explanatory. Everyone knows what that is if you've used any type of computer or laptop before. A bit more complicated is the difference between workstations and servers. This is something you'll need to know. A workstation is something a typical professional and end user will use day to day. It might be a laptop or a desktop. So this would be like Windows 10 or Windows 11, for example, just regular home edition stuff or regular work edition programs and software and operating systems. Nothing too crazy. This is likely what you use either at work or at school. And then a server is still a computer. However, it's meant to be always on. Whereas your laptop is okay if you turn it off at the end of the day or when you're no longer using it. Whereas a server, you typically want this to be running at all times. So think of Facebook or like Google, like the Google website, google.com, the search engine. When you use it, you want it to be available at all times. Can you imagine if at the end of the day, the Google server just turned off? No one will be able to connect to it. So therefore, these computers usually have much more beefy hardware requirements, right? They have much more RAM, they have a better CPU, probably multiple CPUs, and they have a large hard drive or tape drive, whatever storage mechanism they use. Another basic computer skill you'll need is to be able to navigate the web. So knowing how to find information online through web searches and queries. You're going to be doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, but knowing how to navigate that, websites, create bookmarks, create different folders, create different tabs, things like that. It's really going to help in this field. Number 2 is command line knowledge. So you can see on the right, this is the Windows command prompt. You see it all the time in like CSI or Mr. Robot. It's the black terminal, the black box. That's super scary, super intimidating at first, but I promise you, with a small learning curve, it's really not that bad at all. And I think personally, it's very fun to learn. So should you start with Linux, Windows, or Mac? These are the 3 main operating system providers. My answer is start with whatever you have available to you. So if you're using Windows right now, just use the Windows command prompt. If you're using some type of Mac device, just use their built-in terminal. Or if you're already more of a technical person and you have a Linux installed, just use that. I personally think Linux is more fun. But once you learn one, it becomes pretty easy to learn the other ones. They're not one-to-one conversions, but it's very, very similar. Additionally, these are all faster than using the graphical user interface, the GUI. These are the windows and the menus and the tabs that you use your mouse for. Click on different menus and run something that way. Once you get adept with the command line, you can just automate a lot of those things. Additionally, a lot of tools that you'll be using are command line based. So if you're familiar with Kali Linux or Parrot OS, these are 2 penetration testing based operating systems that have a bunch of tools pre-built, pre-installed, and they are usually on the command line. So being comfortable using it and navigating, installing software and packages, and looking at help menus, it's going to bode very well in your career, especially if you want anything on the keyboard, anything technical. So you definitely want to be comfortable on the command line, especially if you have some type of technical role, such as an analyst or a penetration tester or an incident responder, and so on. Lastly, people will think you're a cool hacker. People will think you're some type of wizard, some type of genius. And that's really awesome. Next up is just basic networking knowledge. To me, this was the hardest area for me to grasp. It really didn't make any sense at first. And I think that's because there's the logical stuff, the abstract stuff that you can't see, as well as like the tangible hardware devices. So the abstract stuff is things like the OSI model, which I have on the right. This is all abstract for the most part. It's all invisible, right? It's IP addresses, it's packets, it's information being sent over a physical medium, so like over routers and switches, but you can't see it. You can't reach out and grab like a binary. And I think for me, that's why this was kind of a hard concept to grasp. But overall, it's not too difficult. People can spend their entire career just in networking. It's that broad of a subset. You should know the basics, but you don't need to be an expert by any means. So some hardware devices that you should know are the router. You're probably most familiar with this because you have to reset it every time your Wi-Fi doesn't work. A switch, that's the picture I have on the bottom left corner. Put simply, a switch will forward frames, all of its interfaces. You can see it has those little holes in the back, those little plugs. So your computer is plugged into the switch, and that's how it communicates with all the other computers within some type of work environment. And then you have a firewall. This can be software or hardware based, but essentially a firewall, my analogy is like it's a bouncer at a club. Different information, different people want to get in, and the bouncer is responsible for either accepting or denying those people based on whatever criteria it uses to judge. And you can configure your firewall pretty much any way you want, as long as you don't lock yourself out. IP addresses, there's public IP and there's private IP. Your public IP is what you use to communicate to the internet, and the private IP is what you use to communicate locally with any devices in your network. And then some common ports and protocols. This is like job interview guaranteed question, right? What are HTTP? That's port 80, SSH, port 22, Telnet is port 23, SMB is port 445. But you could also argue like 135 for NetBIOS. And you need to know, what do these protocols do? So web, remote login, encrypted, unsecure remote logon, and then a file sharing access method for SMB. Tip number 4, basic system administration. So essentially just knowing how to configure a bunch of different things on your computer. So you should be able to set up virtual machines, especially Kali Linux or Parrot OS, so you can get practice using these penetration testing tools. You should know how to troubleshoot hardware and software problems that you run into. Things don't always work. Sometimes you need to reset the computer or reset whatever service that you started. Sometimes you need to dig into the weeds and read the documentation, read the manuals for that, and figure out, hey, why isn't this working? What did I misconfigure? What's going on? And it's up to you to be able to fix that. And we kind of already went over downloading software and reading manuals. You also need to know how to manage user accounts. So creating additional users, updating passwords, right? What's the password security policy? Is it a weak password policy? Deleting users. So you might be saying, hey, I'm not a system admin. Why do I need to be able to create or know how to manage user accounts? Well, let's say you're a penetration tester or a red teamer or even a security analyst. Creating additional accounts on a system, that's an offensive technique that attackers like to use, right? It's a backup in case whatever initial access method they had no longer works. Well, now they can create their own user with a password that they created, and they can just log in that way. It's a back door, essentially. It's a way back into the system if they get kicked out. So as an analyst, maybe you're not creating users, but you should be monitoring and looking and checking logs. Like, hey, a user was created on this workstation and it shouldn't have been, right? Red flags, things that stick out. You should also be able to configure different security products, things like your antivirus, so Windows Defender, for example. You should be able to configure a firewall, make sure that is turned on, right? That's very important, especially for your home devices. Make sure your firewall is turned on. Make sure it's not allowing just everything, only allow certain websites and ports. I'm a Windows user, so on Windows 11, Windows 10, the default is usually pretty good. You don't need to tweak it too much. Pushing forward, my next tip is basic scripting knowledge. So scripting/programming. So common languages that you'll see all the time are Python, Bash, which is the Linux interpreter, PowerShell, which used to be only Windows, but as of PowerShell version 7, it can run on Windows, Linux, and Mac. You have Ruby, which I believe is used mostly as a web framework, but I personally am most familiar with it as the Metasploit framework scripting language of choice. So if you have to ever create a Metasploit module or edit some of that code, it's going to be in Ruby. Then there's Perl, which I don't really see too much. I think Perl is kind of being one-upped, replaced by Python. So scripting, I think it's super fun. You can automate a lot of repetitive tasks. So things like scanning, write your initial recon, or parsing logs, any scheduled tasks. You can write a script to do that for you instead of either doing it manually or running the commands one by one. You'll also be using a lot of different tools, and sometimes they won't work, or sometimes you want to add additional functionality, or if you do any type of penetration testing or exploit development, sometimes you download scripts from ExploitDB or just different GitHub repos. And these are usually written in Python just because that's a very popular language. So being able to like tweak that and understand how it works, and hey, this one payload, the shellcode it uses, it doesn't work on my system. Maybe it's using a 64-bit shellcode, but you're attacking a 32-bit target, for example. So being able to modify and configure bits and pieces of an exploit, that might be the difference between whether or not you gain access or not. Plus, like I said, I just think it's super fun. In this image, it has a bunch of different programming and scripting language on the right. Lastly, my bonus skill is just learn how to learn. You might be saying, what on earth are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense. Well, what I mean is you need to figure out what learning style works best for you, whether that's text-based, video, audio, hands-on, workshops, boot camps. Everyone learns a bit differently, and you'll need to know what works for you because you will always need to learn something new in this field. There's always going to be a new access vector. There's always going to be a new APT. There's always going to be a new threat, a new tool, whatever. There's always going to be something new that's going on. And if you want to stay current in the industry, you've got to do your research. You've got to set up practice examples and labs and do workshops and capture the flag challenges and conferences and this and that. It's a lot. So if you are a passionate learner and you understand how not to just work hard, but also work smart, you're going to grow exponentially quickly in this career field. So there you have it, folks. That's really all I had. Those are 5 and 6 quick skills that I believe a beginner should learn. What skills would you recommend a beginner, someone brand new in cybersecurity? Let me know in the comments down below. Study resources, as well as anything else I'm affiliated, will be linked in the description. As always, take it easy and see you guys in the next video.